This panel is on economic development and rebuilding Ukraine. And obviously this topic, the topic of economic development, is a vital component, perhaps the key component to Ukraine's long-term prosperity and success as an independent state. And it's tightly intertwined with the political development of the country, whether it be through sound economic policies or, very importantly, the rule of law, which, as we know, is an extremely acute issue in Ukraine. And all of this is also linked to what we were listening about in the first panel, the human costs of war, and some of those panelists made that linkage.
Thank you very much, Orest, for their kind introduction. It is with great honor that and thanks to the organizers for inviting all of us to participate and to see this great turnout that we have. I'm going to say a few words because with this group, this may be my last chance. But I was in Ukraine twice in the last 3 months, and I have to say that I think universally people were disappointed in government or outside of government with the pace of reform. And depending on the point of view, on your point of view, with a new government coming into being, that there would be need to restart or start reform in a serious way on the economy. And also, I think a need to engage the Ukrainian public and civil society more directly on economic reform, the reasons for it, what are the benefits in the long run, and so on. So much work needs to be done. I'm a little bit surprised that Nadia asked me to moderate, because those of you few of you who know my views on economic reform, and particularly in the energy sector in Ukraine, know that I'm not moderate. But luckily for all of us, we have a much wiser, more knowledgeable panel to help us through thinking about what the state of reform is in Ukraine right now, what are the prospects going forward, as well as the kind of assistance Ukraine's going to need in the future as it embarks on a serious reform path, assuming that there's political will to do so. With that, I'm going to invite Ambassador Taylor to start first.
No one can speak on any panel about economic reform if Anders Osland is on the panel. So I'm not going to violate that rule. And Nadia asked me if I would talk a little bit about my experience on economic reconstruction as opposed to economic reform. And so reform to honors and reconstruction I've had some experience with in Afghanistan and in Iraq, as Orest mentioned, and in a couple other places as well. So there are some lessons that we can kind of draw from that are applicable to Ukraine, in particular the Donbass, which we ought to think through as we're doing this. The first message, of course, and the first lesson is, in order to do any kind of economic reconstruction, developmental reconstruction, infrastructure reconstruction, you need security. This is the prerequisite. I was in Iraq, and when I arrived in Baghdad, I had in my office $18.4 billion worth of reconstruction. So my office was called the Iraq Reconstruction Management Office. Had the not great acronym of IRMO, but we were to do reconstruction. And this was in 2004, when there was not security in Iraq, to a large degree, still not. But the reconstruction effort, we tried anyway. We made an effort to repair oil pipelines, and as fast as we could repair them, they get blown up again. We made an effort to replace and reinstall electrical generation equipment. Same thing. Put them in. Couldn't even get them in sometimes. Part of the challenge there in Iraq was moving big generators across long expanses of desert that are open to attack The message here for Ukraine is the security situation in Donbass needs to be fixed. And what that, of course, means is Russians need to get out. The Ukrainians need to take over the security and the control of the border. And we'll come back to kind of the political situation, but that's part of security as well. So first message is the importance of security. Second lesson is local ownership. So many international donors came into Afghanistan and tried to do big things. The United States was not the only one, but we tried to do that. One of the big things we did while I was there was to build a road from the capital to the second largest city in the country, from Kabul to Kandahar. And we did. We succeeded, and we brought in a lot of equipment, and the Turks were very efficient. And we decided we were going to do it so fast that we wanted to have 3 or 4 or 5 companies working at the same time at different places, all up and down that quarter of the circle, the ring road this was the beginning of. And we created the road. We built the road. However, it was A, not secured, and B, the ministries in Afghanistan that were responsible for maintaining the road were not capable of doing that. Both securing and maintaining the road, not capable of doing it. So it went quickly into disrepair, and a lot of what we invested there did not really pay off. Local ownership is important, and start small. In particular, international donors. When we're thinking about what kind of projects to undertake in Donbass, there needs to be international support. There needs to be international financial support, and that support needs to go into competent Ukrainian ministries, competent, non-corrupt Ukrainian ministries. This is the key to economic development. It's the key to attracting international support for economic development. And so that gets into what Orest already talked about, and we've talked about here, we'll talk about all afternoon, is reform, political reform as well as economic reform. It also talks about elected officials. Local support needs to have elected officials in Donbass. So in Donetsk, in Luhansk, these elections need to take place. And again, you can't do elections in those two places without security. So that's an important first component. And then get to the elections, and then you can have local support and local direction and local confidence in what is the priorities for reconstruction. Ed, I'm going to stop here and look forward. I'm going to make a liar out of you to give you plenty of time to talk, but I'm also going to defer to Anders on his economic reform.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, Nadia. It's a pleasure to be here. What I thought I should do here today is to tell you a lot of economic reforms have been done in the last year. It's not true that economic reforms have been small or slow. What is true is that some things have been done very well, where you have true reforms who have really been able to push ahead, and in other areas, nothing has been done. And I'll give you 3 areas where a lot has been done. It's in fiscal policy, it's in monetary policy and banking, and it is in energy policy, in spite of what I said here to begin with. And then you have one big area where absolutely nothing has been done, and that's the whole legal area. Judicial reform, prosecution, and therefore you don't have property rights, and if you don't have property rights, privatization doesn't make much sense. So let me start with the achievements. Ukraine had in 2013 a current account deficit, a foreign deficit of 9% of GDP. Last year, nothing, because of a floating exchange rate. So it's true that the exchange rate has fallen 3 times, but it means that the foreign account is now stable. And thanks to international financing, Ukraine's reserves have increased from $5 billion a year ago to $13.5 billion now. It should be more if Ukraine could set up a government and get $4 billion that essentially lying on the table and just to pick up if there is a new government. But there is no new government, so therefore that, those credits from the IMF, the US, and the EU will not be delivered until there is a new government. So this is on the foreign account. On the domestic account, Ukraine had a budget deficit in 2014 of 10.5% of GDP. Last year, that was down to 2.3% of GDP. Or if I put it in other terms, this has been done by cutting public expenditures from 53% of GDP, which is a high West European level, to 44% of GDP. Cuts of 9% of GDP. This is exactly what you want if you have a big corrupt state that gives the money to the wrong people rather than taking care of the population. So this was a great achievement, which has then been accomplished under Minister of Finance Natalia Jaresko with, I would like to emphasize, strong support from Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. So something there has been done. And also, Ukraine adopted last year a new tax code. This tax code means that the payroll tax, what we call social security tax, was cut from an extraordinary 45% to 22%. This had to be done, and this has now been implemented. This is a very important improvement. And on top of that, Ukraine managed to get a debt restructuring so that for the next 4 years, Ukraine has to pay back very little on foreign loans. These are all very substantial achievements. And let me then move into banking. As you possibly know, the best way of robbing a bank is to own a bank. If you own a bank, normally you have 8% of the assets that you put up as capital. And a standard practice, unfortunately, in Ukraine in recent years has been to give 80% of the loans to yourself, and then you happen to be unable to repay your own bank, and then you make 10 times the money. This has been a standard procedure. What has happened under Valeria Hontareva, the current head of the National Bank, is that she has gone after these nasty businessmen and closed them down one after the other. She has closed down 68 out of Ukraine's 180 banks. So now this banking system starts looking okay. The decent banks are being left, and the so-so banks are being cleaned up so that they are becoming decent as well. So this is a major achievement. For all those who have visited Institutska, where the National Bank is located, you have seen big, steady demonstrations outside the National Bank. What is the National Bank doing to our banks and to our money? For the last several months, there have been no demonstrations. The new state of affairs has been established. So these are heroes. And then we come to Ed's favorite area, the energy reform. What Ukraine did last year was that from the 1st of April, the government finally increased gas and utility and electricity prices by about 4 times. Previously, gas prices for households in Ukraine had been 12% of the world market price. Now they went up to 50% of the world market price. And happily, the world market price at the same time fell by half. So on average, the Ukrainian energy prices are now close to the world market level. There are funny things here, but this is the overall picture. And this means that Ukraine has saved enormously on energy. Energy consumption last year in Ukraine fell by 20%, and it's likely to fall by about as much this year. And this means that Ukraine's exports, the imports of gas from Russia, that used to be 40 billion cubic meters a year a few years ago, was last year down to 6 billion cubic meters. And this year, Ukraine probably will not import any gas from Russia. It only needs to import about 10 billion cubic meters, and that can be imported from the European Union, from a normal market. Some of this gas comes from Russia, but you don't have to deal with Gazprom, which is a very nasty organization that you're better not to deal with. So these are great achievements. There are many other things that I'm sure that Morgan will talk about, but I wanted to give you the sunny side of the story. Thank you.
Anders, who is more knowledgeable about the Ukrainian economy than anyone outside of Ukraine, or maybe inside Ukraine, has written this wonderful paper on energy sector reform that is released last week, I think, and it's on the Atlantic Council's website. So I recommend that those of you interested in the subject take a look at it. If you want to find out what small amount of difference that I have with Anders, come to Atlantic Council at 4 p.m. this coming Monday, and there will be a debate about that.
That's when we release the papers. It's not out on the
Oh,
website.
it's not out. I'm sorry.
We couldn't do it without you.
Oh, okay. Well, to be unveiled on this coming Monday. But one of the communities certainly that is a supporter and recipient of the whole reform effort in Ukraine is the business community. And with that, we're grateful to have Morgan here with us. Morgan, please.
Thank you very much. As I look at the panel here, I see at least 100 years of experience with Ukraine in economic development and all other areas. It looks like by now we could declare victory and go home. So I don't know if we're all experts and can say what should happen or not, but we're all still involved, and that's very important. Anders has talked about the macroeconomic section. That's one side of a two-sided coin, and that's been where most of the progress has been made, and that's where the business community is very pleased about the stability of the currency. Of course, they'd like to see the IMF get back involved and quit playing politics, but they're pretty well experienced in how to do business in Ukraine. They like the macroeconomic stability. They have money. They're ready to move forward. They're ready to invest a lot more money in Ukraine, but they're not doing it. The international business community is probably the best thing that Ukraine's had going for it. When it came to the revolution 2 years ago, all the businesses, most of them stayed there. They helped all their employees. They moved most all of their employees out of the conflict zones and gave them jobs other places. They involved in humanitarian assistance. They were very committed to Ukraine, and probably 75 country managers that I've talked to said they had to spend the first few months convincing their bosses not to leave Ukraine, that Putin was not coming to Kiev. They wouldn't lose all their assets and their employees would all be murdered. So it took a long time. But then they said, their businesses said, well, wait a minute, we're going to clamp down on the budgets. We're going to wait and see. And so that's kind of where they are now. They're not ready to put money back in Ukraine, and money is not going back into Ukraine. Even though all these major corporations have money, they borrow money at international rates, not at 35% like a Ukraine business, but they're holding back. They're in a kind of a holding, circling pattern. And as Anders knows, you're never going to get out of this crisis just with macroeconomic stability. You're going to have to get business moving, investing, growing, creating wealth, creating tax income, or they're never going to get out of this hole that they're in. So they've got a lot of problems with macroeconomics, but macroeconomics is really a crisis. It's urgent, and they don't feel that the president has any sense of urgency, or that he really cares, or that he's moving ahead. And businesses finally said, we've done everything in the past. They keep promising. They don't deliver. Now we're going to wait for them. The EU's been telling Ukraine it's your turn. The United States has been saying, Penny Pritzker, it's your turn. The business community is now saying, it's your turn, Mr. President, to provide leadership and to move this country ahead, and then we'll follow and we'll put in a lot of money. We know $5 billion at least is ready to go into Ukraine from international companies, particularly in rivers and railroads and ports. Cargill just announced a $100 million program. I talked to Cargill. They said yes, but you got to remember there's about 10 things the government of Ukraine's got to do to make this work. They got to go dredge down on the port and other things. So this program is not done. It could fall off the table any time. Soufflet, the French company, a year and a half ago announced a $150 million port project for Ukraine. I talked to them last week in Ukraine. They said, we haven't put out a dollar yet. We're still trying to get all the clearances and restrictions from the Ukraine government that we need. So point one is that the business community has stayed involved in Ukraine. They want to be involved in Ukraine. They want to put a lot more money there, but they're holding back. They're in a holding pattern at the present time. Secondly, we'd like to say that today, one of the big problems is because of the crisis and because of the lack of action on the part of the Ukraine government, the lack of leadership from the president, financing is not available on any kind of a large scale. The National Bank of Ukraine will pay a bank 23% to put the money in the bank. So what do they charge customers? 30%, 35%. You can't operate a Ukrainian business that way. Financing is not available. Short-term financing, mid-term financing, and private equity money is not coming to Ukraine. It's a financial desert out there when it comes to finding money. And when you're trying to buy $250,000 U.S. tractors or 500,000 dump trucks for ore, you've got to have financing. So this has affected, of course, all the U.S. businesses that sell high-ticket items there. The business community is saying, yeah, you've made some progress, but there's not a critical mass yet that we feel comfortable with. And if you took a vote from the business community today about this present government, particularly about the president, they'd say a vote of very low confidence. And how do we know? Because they vote with their dollars. They vote with their investments. When the business community is happy, when they're satisfied, when they think the time is right, they're going to put money in there. They're not putting money in there. And they're saying, we're tired of just what Anders talked about, that the president of Ukraine has not done anything about corruption, not on any massive scale. He appointed a prosecutor general that everybody has told him is not adequate to the job. He's refused for 2 years to get rid of the guy. He's not done anything about clearing up corruption in the prosecutor general office or the other 10,000 prosecutors there are, or the other 20,000 judges that they are. He hasn't done anything. So what's his problem? How can you be the president of Ukraine after the Revolution of Dignity and people died and you refuse to do anything about your corruption as the president of Ukraine, and you protect your friends, you protect yourself, you've got 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the present, and you refuse to move forward on corruption? Business says we're tired of that. We're tired of all the tax authorities harassing us. We know 10 U.S. corporations right now that are under harassment by the tax authorities. We know a U.S. company that wants to provide HIV medicine to the Ministry of Health at an 80% discount. The Ministry of Health won't even talk to them. We know about another U.S. company that's got a major drug that wants to go into Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities mistranslated the law, and they won't let it come in. I just talked to a very successful businessman from Lviv who's made a lot of money in one area, and now he's going to spend his money into farming. He's got a 10,000 hectare farm in Lviv Oblast. And last week he told me in Ukraine, in Kiev, he said, Morgan, let's be honest. All this talk about anti-corruption, things they've done is just blah, blah, blah. I operate this 10,000 hectare farm. I'm a very successful businessman. I have a lot of influence. But let me tell you, I have to spend 50% of my time just dealing with the authorities. Only 50% of my time left to try to manage my business. And let me tell you one thing. If I did not participate in the structure of authorities here in the Lviv Oblast, and if I didn't participate in what you call corruption, I'd have to close my farm down. I cannot run my farm in the Lviv Oblast without participating in massive corruption. They stop my trucks. They say they're too heavy. They stop me from registering leases. They stop me from doing this. They stop me from doing that. And he said, Do I want to shut my complete farm down and do nothing? Or do I want to operate it and I do have to participate in the system? And there's 1,000 ways that they still are stopping me if you don't get involved in corruption. And he says, I hate it, I don't want to do it, but do I want to close my business down? He said, that's the truth. Don't be deceived by what's going on here. There's still thousands of points of corruption. So the business community is voting no confidence to low confidence with this president who's not using his authority and his ability to fight corruption. And the second area, of course, is the bureaucracy and the restrictions. They did cut the National Bank from 10,000 employees to 5,000. That's probably the most massive. They need to cut it to 2,500. But in terms of restrictions in the Ministry of Health and in the Ministry of Infrastructure, still takes 18 taxes and 24 pieces of paper licenses to move a barge from upper Dnieper River down to the port. That's ridiculous, and it's way too expensive, and they say they're going to change it, but do they? No, they do not. So the devil's in the details, Anders. The devil's in all these restrictions, and businesses finally said, we're fed up with no fight against corruption. We're fed up with the fact there's not a massive fight against the bureaucracy, and we're going to put all of our investments on hold until they move, until they change. The National Bank still got all kinds of currency regulations that are very destructive to business. And again, there's no work in the Prosecutor General's office. Finally, after 2 years, maybe he's finally out. They said he was going to be out. He went on vacation. He came back. They said he didn't have enough votes. Give me a break. Where was the president in all this? He appointed the guy. He wanted the guy. He's defending the guy. Why is he defending the guy? He's not defending the future of Ukraine. He's not defending business. He's not defending the citizens. So what is he doing? Nobody knows, and everybody's questioning, and everybody's about frustrated and giving up because he refuses to act. So from a business is saying it's time to light a fire under this government. So they're working with civil society. They all have people that are working with the government. Business is fighting every day for a better Ukraine, for a better business environment, and they're hanging tough. But they're tired of protecting the old interest. They want to move on down the road, and everybody's saying, it's up to you, Mr. President, to really provide some leadership. We're very disappointed. You've not lived up to the revolution of dignity. It's now time for you to finally do something. And business says, once you do, you'll find a lot of money coming into Ukraine. We will take Ukraine where it needs to be. The business will provide the stimulus that Ukraine needs. But, Mr. President, you need to do something first.
Thank you very much, Morgan, for giving us a reality check on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. Believe me, the four of us can go on for quite a long time on this general topic, but maybe we can entertain a couple questions from the audience, maybe 10 minutes? Yeah, okay, great.
The president promised that if he got elected, my name's Stephen Keenan, that he would sell his businesses, or at least put them in a blind trust. I think that should be done. My question to you is that there's a lot of discussion right now as to who should be the new prime minister if the current prime minister resigns. Your thoughts on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, you can describe a situation. Morgan and I were in Kiev last week, and I saw President Poroshenko and Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, Yulia Tymoshenko, and Yaresko, Hontareva, and Abramovichus, and several members of the parliament, and discussed all these things in the US ambassador, and discussed all this in detail. You have three candidates for prime minister. The least likely now is Natalia Yaresko, who would insist on a non-political, technocratic government, and that doesn't satisfy the interest or more interest in defending the vested interest than the interest of a nation. So she's out, essentially. The second alternative, what the president wants, is that it will be a government more dominated by his people. And his candidate is 38-year-old Volodymyr Groysman, who made his career as mayor in Vinnytsia, which is President Poroshenko's fiefdom. And this would be a strongly Vinnytsia-dominated government. This would clearly be less reformist than the current government. And the third alternative is that Prime Minister Yatsenyuk hangs in there by the skin of his teeth, and that basically the current government persists. Recently, the view has been that Groysman is likely to come in. What we have heard since yesterday is that probably can't get the votes. He has a specific problem that there are not enough members of parliament from his own bloc who wants to vote for him. So my guess is that Yatsenyuk will hang on. And the good thing about it is that Natalia Resko would then stay, and also chairwoman of the central bank, Hontareva, are likely to stay. So this is the best possible alternative I see now, and also the most likely, while I don't understand how President Poroshenko will sort this out, because he has only 134 deputies out of, and it needs 226 of support. He sacks Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, who has 81 votes. And why should the Yatsenyuk people vote for a Poroshenko candidate if the government is completely dominated by the president's men and women? So I simply don't understand how the president thinks that he will get away with this.
What would be the best type of government for reform of the options that you outlined, Anders, or maybe Morgan and Ambassador Taylor might weigh in? Well, from the point of view of economic reform, never mind what the political probability is, what would be the best type of government to have going forward?
I'll answer very quickly. I think it would be a technocratic government with reformers who are not part of the system. What Natalia Resko was working on was a government with many foreigners, many people from the Ukrainian diaspora involved in it, and in particular people who had no connection with corruption. And that was too tough a bill for others.
No, I agree. But unless there are Ukrainians in the room, I think, the Americans or others, we can speculate all we want, but the Ukrainians will decide this. This is not really for us to decide. Morgan?
Well, the business communities puts this as an example of why they're on hold. But most of them are saying 2016 we're going to survive, 2017 may get better, maybe in 2018 we can start putting some money in here. That's too long. They need money way before that. They say, why are we more urgent? Why are we more insistent to promote Ukraine than the president is? And they say, well, quit playing these Mickey Mouse games. Let's get on with real business. They all agree that the technocrat government proposed by Natalia Resko would be by far the best, because all the rest of these guys, a lot of them just play games and they don't get real reforms done. And right now the National Bank says you can't take any earnings out of Ukraine. And I've had 25 country managers tell me that their bosses who make all the decisions about more money going into Ukraine saying, we're not putting any more money in there because you can't take any money out. The National Bank says, oh, we have to stop the thieves from taking the money out. We say they've already got all their money out. Why are you stopping real business from getting money in here? And they don't have any answers. So the business community says, quit playing games, the president says the prosecutor general should resign. He resigns, he goes on vacations, comes back. They don't have enough votes because the president didn't work the Congress, as we would say. And then they said the minister of economy resigned, the minister of agriculture resigned, the minister of infrastructure resigned. And then they took them back, and
Thanks, Morgan.
they're tired of these games.
Let's try to get
1, 2, 3.
who is already standing up their questions. And gentlemen over here first.
Yeah, my name is Nick Bilogorski, and my question is to any one of you. Is it fair to say that this President Poroshenko, he has completely failed to combat corruption in any meaningful way, and he may not complete his first term? If he doesn't, who and how could take his place?
My name is Bohdan Futay, and because Anders mentioned the constitutional changes and the judiciary, I feel like a member of the Constitutional Commission of Ukraine to make a comment on that. So, may I make a comment?
Please, go ahead. Please.
All right. By the way, the Constitutional Commission has finished its work. It has proposed the changes to the Constitution of Ukraine in 3 parts: decentralization, judicial reforms, and individual human rights. That work has been done in the area of decentralization. That has not gone anywhere, but the Constitutional Commission did its work under the direction of the President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, who appointed all of these people. It was Parliament that voted for the changes, and then the Constitutional Court approved the changes. However, the problem developed because of the Minsk Accords and the lack of 300 votes to approve the decentralization part, the local government authority part of the changes. Therefore, it was never presented to a vote to Parliament. However, the changes on judicial reforms have been done, have been submitted to the President, and the President has submitted it to the Rada, and the Rada now will be considering at the session when it meets in hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks. That will start the process. By the way, the changes to the Constitution on the judiciary as proposed by the Constitutional Commission went twice before the Venice Commission and had its approval. So that was done. So President Poroshenko has done his most concerning constitutional changes, and he has pushed for those changes to be adopted at the Rada. Let me just mention one experience that I have had being in one of the meetings at the Rada of the Constitutional Commission, with meeting with some deputies for, these deputies, I'm not going to mention their names. They are from democratic organizations and now belong to the various parties in Ukraine. In talking about the Minsk Accords, I made the mistake about mentioning as an agreement. Well, they all jumped at me that this is not an agreement, these are only discussions. So I said, fine. But this is what the President is proposing. What are you proposing? What is your alternative to these Minsk discussions? We are against Poroshenko. I said, no, that is not an answer. What are your solutions to the problem that Ukraine is having? They have no solutions. And discussing with these peoples, unfortunately, they have no solutions. They're all against the president because they're vying for political influence in the country, but they do not have any solution. It's a personal attack on the president rather than proposing solutions. Therefore, we also have to be mindful of all of this, that as far as the constitutional changes that are being proposed, the work has been done by the Constitutional Commission, and now we'll see what happens. So there is that movement to reform Ukraine along the legal matters, so Ukraine will become more a country based on rule of law.
Thank you very much.
My name is Vadim Gorbach. I'm a consultant at the World Bank. My question is, you mentioned a lot of symptoms in Ukraine which are consistent with the view that it's an oligarchic system in Ukraine that's still impeding its democratic development and business environment and so forth. Do you agree with this view that it's an oligarchic system? And what do you think it will take to start dismantling the systems, to start the process of real change, real lasting change? The West right now probably has an unprecedented leverage in Ukraine, considering Ukraine's economic and geopolitical vulnerability. Do you think it's more pressure from the West on the Ukrainian government that it's needed that will work, or do you think it's only civil society, Ukrainian civil society, can make this change happen? Thank you.
So let me just address the first question and Judge Futay's point and come back to Anders' point. Because the answer to your first question is yes, there have been some reforms. And Anders talked about it. Raising prices to world levels, that's an enormous reform and wipes out an incredible amount of corruption. I mean, that is just cut it off. The judge talked about the reforms that the Commission is doing and that the President has sent to the Rada. So the answer is there have been some things done. And the only other point I'd make is I was there, for many people in this room probably joined, we observed the election where the President won every oblast, either a majority or plurality in every oblast. It's never happened in the history of Ukraine. And so the question you asked about should he resign, no. He was elected. He ought to stay his 5-year term. He's got a lot to do. We've all talked about how much he's got to do. He's been invaded by the Russians. He's had part of his country occupied, annexed, and he needs to get the Russians out. So in order to do that, we need to support. That's the kind of support he needs from the West. We need it from the IMF. We need that economic support. We need political support here as well.
Thank you, Bill. Anders?
Well, let me pick up a little bit on this, what can be done to fight corruption. The most obvious thing is to get the prices right. That is to unify prices so that you can't arbitrate between different gas prices, which has been the way the richest people in Ukraine have made the money all the time. That has more or less been done now. And another is that you should not be allowed to steal money out of the treasury. In Ukrainian, you have a special word, deriban, for theft of money from the treasury. This can be done through transparency, and a lot of the transparency has been done. Then you need to get rid of 1,833 state enterprises. In the biggest state enterprises, you can get tens of millions of dollars through transfer pricing, which is a standard post-Soviet practice. You buy gas for a high price through your Cypriot trading company, and you sell your product at a low price through your Cypriot trading company, and then the controller of this enterprise can change very fast. This is a standard way of making money. When you demand that there are domestic owners of and the enterprises are registered at home, and this has been done to some extent. But the fundamental thing is you need to have people at the top who want to fight corruption. That is a precondition most of the time in order to get it done. There are countries that have managed to do lots of reforms without having that. And that has been with very heavy and pointed conditionality from the West. So the best example is Romania, where one top leader after the other has been suspect of corruption, and even so, Romania has done a lot to clean up corruption, thanks to hard pressure from the European Union. But when the European Union needs to have more skin in the game than the European Union has so far in Ukraine. Thank you.
Morgan, any other thoughts?
No, I'd only comment that President Yushchenko said bandits to jail, no bandits went to jail. Yanukovych didn't ever say no bandits went to jail, and of course no bandits went to jail. Now the president and the people of Ukraine said bandits to jail, no bandits to jail. Sums it up very quickly and very easily. Corruption is massive and still goes on.
I will give one more advertisement for Anders' session at Atlantic Council Monday at 4 p.m. That although burner tip prices have gone up, wellhead prices have not been reformed. So There are lots of room for shadowy games still in the energy sector, and they're going on as we speak. So you want to learn more, come to Anders's session and read his paper, which also says basically that economic reform that has been conducted so far has been most necessary, but not yet sufficient by far. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the panel.